Well, we're having this conference today over household over-indebtedness. It's organized by the EESC, European Economic and Social Committee.
Someone is pushing.
Somebody's taking the...
Yeah, somebody's taking the mic away. So please don't push the button unless you want to speak.
No, it won't change anything.
It won't change anything. Someone is pushing the button.
It's because
so.
someone is...
Okay. Well, let's move on because we are already late. It's organized by the EESC. I'm a member of that, European Economic and Social Committee. I'm president of the IN section. That's why I'm welcoming you opening this conference. It is co-organized with the European Consumer Debt Network, ECDN, and the European Financial Inclusion Network, EFIN. And well, to start with, I would like to thank the team that has worked very hard to have this conference here today. It's Anne Philippe from BEUC, the European Consumer Organization, Olivier Micol from EFIN, Richard Amström from the Malmö University, Marcel Warnaar from NIBUD, it's a Dutch organization for budget on households, and Wilhelm Nordenankar from the Consumentenverket. And on top of that, he also would like to thank Réseau Financité for their very intense support. The problem of household over-indebtedness has already been on the agenda of the EESC for 15 years. In 2010, we produced an information report over household over-indebtedness. Now we are preparing an opinion on it, and we just have well, we're finding out that things didn't get better since 2014. It got worse. So it is a point of interest that's becoming bigger and bigger. Over-indebtedness is an increasingly prominent cause of poverty in Europe. Among the working poor and the long-term unemployed, over-indebtedness usually arises from accumulated missed payments on utility, phones bills and on rent. The crisis, with its layoffs and reduced social benefits, has enlarged this group of poor people with debt problems, which has long formed a major part of the over-indebted cohort. But that group has increased very fast during the last crisis, and that's coming from a different group. People who were had well-paid employment, but they lost their jobs and are now left with a large mortgage on their houses without the prospect of increasing their income anytime soon. So let's make it clear, a European strategy against over-indebtedness is very much needed. Today we will discuss what kind of measures are available to limit and cure over-indebtedness and what could be done at the EU level. At the table with me are sitting our first speakers, from whom I would like to welcome Mrs. Despina Spanou, Director for Consumer Affairs at the Director General for Justice and Consumers, Mr. Philippe Lamberts, Member of the European Parliament and Co-Chair of the Greens EFA political group. At the Parliament, Mr. Lamberts is a member of the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs, working mainly on the financial regulation front. Mr. Olivier Micol, Head of the Financial Services and Redress Unit at the Director General for Justice and Consumers, and Mr. Andrea Falanga, Researcher at Réseau Financité EFIN. We will start with Mrs. Despina and Mr. Lamberts. They will... Mr. Lamberts first. Well, okay, we start with Mr. Lamberts and then Mrs. Despina.
It's as you wish.
We're not going to fight on that.
Yeah, well.
So we will start with Mr. Lamberts, then Mrs. Despina. They will go into the aim of the conference, and after that we will get Mr. Micol and Mr. Falanga, and they will go into the specific details of over-indebtedness. So, Mr. Lamberts, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Well, maybe it's, after all, a good idea that I speak first, because I think that we have to go to the root causes of over-indebtedness. We have a tendency, well, I'd like to say they have a tendency in political circles to look at over-indebtedness saying, how come these people are getting so deep into debt? So we should find ways to cure the effects of the disease rather than the root causes. Because you said, well, over-indebtedness causes poverty, but what if the causality would be actually the reverse? That is, that poverty is causing over-indebtedness. Europe has found the way back to growth already since 2008. It's seldom said. People speak about recession and all the rest of it, but we have found growth in Europe. It's a modest growth. It's 1% a year. 1% additional people at risk of poverty and social exclusion. 1% a year. So that's growth. So remember the EU 2020 objectives, where we said that we should reduce the number of people at risk of poverty and social exclusion in Europe. Well, we are doing the exact opposite. And this is, of course, the root cause of over-indebtedness. If you have policies that actually result in income distributions evolving in a way that makes it impossible for people, even people having a job, to pay the basic stuff they need, and you said it, it's about utilities, it's about rent, it's not about flying twice a year to Thailand. It is really about basic stuff. If you have an economic and social policy that results in people getting lower and lower and lower incomes, you shouldn't be surprised that at the end what you get is over-indebtedness. And so, as a policymaker, I would be tempted to say that the primary thing that we need to cure is go after the root cause of inequality, and that is basically the kind of structural reforms that are not even pushed, but imposed on member states. When the basic policies are saying, one, we should reduce the role of the state, because that's what it boils down to. When we say we have the Stability and Growth Pact that forces a balanced budget, you might say, in principle, fine, but if you have competition on the income side and strict rules on the balance, then the only thing that you can do, because the competition on income, that is the tax competition, leads to ever lower incomes for the state, the only outcome that you can have is lower state expenditures. And as everyone knows, the state expenditures benefit most the people at the bottom end of the spectrum. So that's the first kind of structural reforms which actually are making sure that the things get worse. So it's not an undesired side effect, it is the main effect. The second thing is we need to be more competitive, that is we need to flexibilize labor markets and we need to reduce the cost of labor. That's basically what they say when they think competitiveness. They are not thinking in terms of energy cost, of resource cost, of capital cost, they are thinking of labor cost only. And of course, this is only the denominator, they do not think of the numerator, which is increasing value. So the mainstream policymakers and economists say, you have to reduce the cost of labor. And how do you do that? More flexible labor markets, that means more competition, so that salaries are going down, and because we need to balance the budgets again, lower social protection, that is lower replacement incomes when there's a need for that. And so the ultimate, before you get to slavery, is the zero-hour contract that you have in the UK. Well, next is slavery, which is in economic terms even better, but, well, apparently the treaties do not allow for that, but the treaties do allow for zero-hour contracts. So these are the root causes. So the question that you are asking is, what can Europe do about this? You might say, well, you know, these are policy areas, taxation and social policy. These are for member states. Is it so? Is it really so? When I'm looking at the country-specific recommendations each year in the semester, I see many recommendations on the social side and on the labor market side, even though this is not an EU competence. I see recommendations on the taxation side, but you know, not in the sense of we should tax the corporations more. It's rather in the sense, well, you should reduce taxation. So Europe is actually doing a lot. Problem is that Europe is doing the wrong thing. So we should indeed, if we really want to curb the root cause of over-indebtedness, use the European instruments, which are basically the European Economic Governance Framework, to induce member states to do different policies on all these fields. But that would, of course, require a change in the center of the political center of gravity in Europe. I mean, now we have the grand coalition between EPP, SND, Liberals, and ECR to some extent. we should basically change the center of gravity, because basically they share the mantra of orthodox policy. So we would need basically to say, okay, we make, for instance, social targets, binding targets. So when you have a discipline where the binding element is the budgetary discipline and all other elements are soft targets, if you are a government, well, you do first what is mandatory and then you do the soft things if there's margin left. Of course, there's never margin left. So the only way to force governments to balance and to have budgetary policies that lead to equality would be to say, okay, we have a target in reduction of poverty and social exclusion. This should become binding. We might have a binding target in terms of reducing inequalities. And then when you are confronted to balancing your budget, maybe this forces you not to go the easy way, that is cut, cut, cut in public spending and make labor markets more flexible. It may lead you to take decisions in terms of a fairer system of taxation, both on income taxation, but make sure, of course, that the big contributors, corporations, are paying their dues. So that might be a strong incentive to member states who say, guys, I can't get to my binding targets, so we need to cooperate in corporate taxation, for instance, otherwise we won't have the income. Right now, they don't want to cooperate on corporate taxation because, well, everyone believes that he or she is smarter than the other one to screw him. So result, well, you see Amazon is not paying, Starbucks is not paying, and all the rest of this. Now, if member states would have binding targets, not just budgetary targets, but investment targets, but social targets, well, then they would have no alternative to go to these, to tackling the income side. And for that, they would be forced to go to cooperation. So the basic question is, A, do we want to make such targets binding? And that is a political choice. And second, do we have the political will, even without changing the treaties, to use the instruments that the European Union has at its disposal to basically steer member states' policies in the opposite direction than the direction it is going today. Because again, make no mistake about this, even though it does not have competencies in, well, few competencies in taxation and social policy, Europe is using them massively, but to objectives that are exactly opposite to what you want to achieve today. So a final word that I might say, there's an issue of push and pull. You want to fix the income side, and again, Europe is a rich continent, so it's more a matter of distribution than a matter of having the means. I mean, we are not Mali, okay, we are not the Maldives, we are Europe. So both the stock and the flows of wealth in Europe are sufficient for everyone to live a decent life. There's no question about that. But then again, you might also ask yourself, what in our society forces people to overconsume? And that's, of course, the idea that, well, the machine must run. So we want growth and jobs, and so we want to produce at any cost, even if what we produce is useless, even if what we produce is not lasting enough. We make fridges that last 7 years, they could last 30 years. That's the engineer speaking. But of course we would do fewer of them. And it doesn't take more time to build a lasting fridge than one that doesn't last. So people might say, come on, but we are going to have less jobs. But the purpose is not to have jobs, the purpose is to have decent income and a decent life. And therefore, we might start thinking, well, should we continue in our productivist approach, which then needs massive advertising to make sure that people buy. And again, we are in a vicious circle, and we should also rethink the system. On the pull side, we should not probably want to pull people to overconsume, to overbuy all the time, which would also, to some extent, do something in terms of over-indebtedness. But I would agree with you that it's the basic components of life that may already, without even any luxury or excessive consumption, cause people just not to be able to have ends meet. So Europe can do a lot, but I would say that it is first and foremost not a question of institutions, not a question of treaties. It is primarily a question of political vision and political will? That is the key question. Thank you. How do I stop this?
Well, thank you. That was a very clear position, and it was challenging enough for some debate. I hope we will have enough time for that left at the end of this session. Now we'll go to Mrs. Spanou. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I will use this one actually.
Then you need the same.
Yes, I will use this one because I have a very low voice, so you will definitely need your headphones. I'm sorry about that. It's it's the weather of Brussels. I see Mr. Siecker also suffers from it. And Mrs. Kikeleki gave us some throat candy, so thank you for that. So thank you very much. It is very nice to be here, and I'm delighted and very honored to speak after Mr. Lamberts, who gave us a very global political view of the problem. It is a problem. We know it's a problem. I don't represent the part of the Commission that deals either with taxation or social policy, but I represent another part that's called the policy for consumers. And I'm here today from that viewpoint, so the picture I will draw is much smaller, if you allow me, Mr. Lamberts, than the one you drew, because I'm here to tell you a bit about how we see this issue from the consumer policy viewpoint. First of all, to tell you that I'm very thankful that we have such a great range of people here representing the issues that are linked to the households over-indebtedness, and in my turn to also thank the organizers. As you know, the Commission heard the call for more information on the problem, for a map around Europe or on where we are with these issues, and we were particularly inspired by the report that was issued by the Economic and Social Committee, coordinated by Madame Meder, with whom we have discussed often this issue. That led us to carry out an in-depth study on the problem of over-indebtedness that my colleague Olivier Micol, who's sitting here on the left side, will present to you shortly. Now, this over-indebtedness study did not basically surprise us, did not leave us speechless. It only confirmed what we all suspected, that basically this is a multifaceted problem. It is linked to the issue of credit, but it is also linked to the current economic conditions. It is linked even to cultural elements, and it is therefore a problem that can only be tackled with multiple solutions. There's not one way to deal with the problem of over-indebtedness. We published this study in October, for those of you who may not be aware. And as I said, we will present the detail of the report later. Now, we confirmed through the study that over-indebtedness is very complex, as I said, and that debts do not solely stem from financial credit. Mr. Lamberts is absolutely right. The part of over-indebtedness for households that stems from credit is a recent phenomenon, because it's only in recent years that, yes, it's true, our societies have changed and people resort to financial credit even for their holidays. This would have been unheard of a couple of decades ago. So, and that is particularly a problem in certain societies, as the study shows. At the same time, the financial crisis only aggravated the problem, because there are households that are over-indebted, as Mr. Lambert said, not because they're taking holidays to Thailand or to the Maldives. You took us to some very exotic destinations this morning. But also because of their bills, because of the regular bills, because people either do not have enough sufficient means to pay because their own income has been lowered, because they're out of job, or because they have a lower salary, or they have to pay more taxes, but also because they have more things to deal with in their household these days. The highest number of financial arrears, as the study shows, relates to bills, not credit. So the study only confirms what we all suspected, and the main predictors of over-indebtedness seem to be poverty, unemployment, and income losses, as I just mentioned. What is interesting, as I indicated earlier, is that the study also shows that there are certain cultural tendencies. So we're hoping that the uptake of the study in member states, because it has different elements for each member state, will also help identify certain specific problems in certain areas of Europe. Now, what do we do? As you know, we have a very interesting opportunity for consumer policy in Europe, because for the first time, the President of the European Commission, when he announced the portfolios and the setup of the European Commission, he spoke of a stronger consumer portfolio. And that does not mean that this is a portfolio that will solve every problem in the world, but it is definitely a portfolio that will contribute to some of the main priorities that the Commission should be tackling right now, linked to the crisis. So the work we do around financial issues is very important. We have very little money to deal with that. The program, the consumer program, the budget program that we have is one of the lowest in the European Union. However, and Mr. Lamberts again said it's about doing decent things sometimes, even with little money. And these are some of the things I'd like to share with you. First of all, a pillar of the consumer program has always been education. And that's because we want people to earn from a young age the tools to be responsible consumers. So our intention is to integrate in the education elements of our program the financial education. And in the project that we have that is called the Consumer Classroom, which is a big portal basically for the whole of Europe that offers teachers the tools for teaching consumer behavior, there we are putting particular accent on teaching about financial issues and financial education. We do the same in the capacity building that we do for consumer organizations, because consumer organizations have a particular role to play. And BEUC, that is a partner in today's event, is in fact our messenger, if I may say so, in this big project, which is called the Consumer Champion. And one of the areas where they're focusing their capacity building in the member states where we are implementing this project is the financial services area. So again, also trying to reach out to help consumer organizations reach out to consumers to give them advice on financial issues. Advice plays, why is that important? Because we have seen that advice plays a very big role to help people make the right decisions either before, but also once they're in debt, because it's also about how to deal with debt when it is there. We conducted the 2-year pilot project in the European Commission from 2012, which finished very recently, that provided training courses to non-profit entities that offer financial advice to consumers, such as consumer associations or debt advice and family planning offices. And we did that because we do have a lot of information that debt advice, in fact, is an investment that can prevent further debt creation. Moreover, as you've heard, in this commission, we are moving more from making legislation rather to implementing it and enforcing it. And enforcing certain existing European rules, because they are very important European rules that can help consumers when it comes to debt and preventing over-indebtedness. It is very important that we as Commission are particularly vigilant in the implementation of instruments like the Consumer Credit Directive. The Consumer Credit Directive has been there for a while. We issued a report recently that shows it is not properly implemented, even though it gives rights to people that are vital, like the right to withdraw from a financial credit that you have entered and then you go home. You know, this financial credit is everywhere. You enter a shop, you mentioned the fridge, it can be a television set before a World Cup tournament. People get tempted, they enter into a contract for financial credit, they go home, they make the calculation, and they think they're bound by the contract. No, they have 14 working days to withdraw. This is a very simple right that can prevent certain debts and that people don't exercise and that member states do not ensure is implemented, including the problem of banks that offer you credit without having checked your capacity for credit, whether it is you are sufficiently equipped to take such credit. So this implementation for us will be a priority, and I think it should help with parts of the problem. And we will learn from this exercise in view of the implementation of the Mortgage Credit Directive, because mortgages are also responsible for debt, and we have to take preventative action there, building on our experience from the Consumer Credit Directive, because that will enter into force very soon, Olivier, if I'm not mistaken, in 2015, and therefore we need to make sure that, again, there we do things right from the beginning. Now, consumer awareness is also very important. For the Consumer Credit Directive that I just mentioned, when we saw that it was not working, it was not being used effectively, we decided to go to some member states and launch an awareness campaign telling people that they have certain rights linked to taking credit and that they should exercise them. We carried out this exercise in member states where the problem was particularly high, namely Spain, Ireland, Malta and Cyprus. And I must tell you that we are now working with our new commissioner to try and see if we can continue this campaign in more member states in Europe so that we create more awareness of consumers on the issue of credit. Last but not least, another piece of legislation that we recently adopted and that is often forgotten, the basic right for access to a bank account, which is a precondition for financial inclusion, and that sometimes can help also people be in the right context for managing their household finances. And this is exactly what this directive that was adopted last July is about. Again, here it will be about proper implementation, but it is about the right of everyone to a bank account, but also the right for everyone to know how much they're paying to have access to this type of financial products. So for banks to have an obligation to give you simple information in a very simple way and clear way, in a one-pager, with all the money that you would owe for the services that you're receiving. So also trying to help the market, help the consumer, and manage their finances. Finally, as I said, debt advice for us is an area where we know we must invest more. Research from the Netherlands, where they have looked further into this issue, found that €1 invested in debt advice saves €3 of losses for the society. That's quite impressive, and it has prompted us to also consider how we should incorporate in our policy more the issue of debt advice. Obviously, these are not solutions that will tackle every aspect of the problem, but from this little consumer policy that has now also been joined with the justice policy, which allows us also to look at means of redress, because that's also another issue that we need to look at, how consumers must have redress once they have been cheated or they have been over-indebted because they didn't calculate properly, but because also the traders have not, or the banks or whoever is on the other side of the table has not made sure that the consumer has the credit worthiness that they need to take the credit. So the means of redress is another area that our joining the justice portfolio will help us, and I think that will complete a certain picture on what we are trying to do for this multifaceted problem.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we've heard the political side, the governance side of the crisis. Now we are going into the details. So first we have Mr. Olivier Micol. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And indeed, I'm going to bring you through the main results of a study on household over-indebtedness, where Mrs. Spanou already, let's say, covered the main political element. But I'm going to go a bit more into the detail of the study. First of all, I would like to highlight that this study is a study that we have given to external contractors. So the result of this study does not reflect necessarily the view of the Commission. This is a basis for work, and your reaction today and in future occasion will help us to, let's say, interpret the result of this study and put it into perspective. There are a lot of studies which exist at national level. And the added value of this study that we conducted is to bring a more EU dimension to the problem. The study is composed of both general conclusion at EU level, but also studies by member states. And I think that it's very important for you, if you have the time, if you're interested, to go to the individual national report. So the objective of the study are very straightforward: to have a mapping of the situation and to look, including the definition of over-indebtedness, to look at the main causes, the consequences, and having let's say, a mapping as well of the best practice and to alleviate the impact. Again, it's not a very big study, so we are modest in our ambition. It's just one contribution to the overall discussion. So we used a lot of different sources. We use the EU Income, Social Inclusion and Living Condition survey, which gives a lot of data at EU level, but we completed it with a lot of other sources, and we have listed them on the slide: Eurostat, the Central Bank, etc. And we were particularly looking at the issue of arrears, and this was mentioned by Mr. Lamberts. This was mentioned also by the chair and by Mrs. Spanou, the question of utility bills. So not only the financial commitment, but also the difficulty to meet the daily financial commitment resulting from rent, from bills, etc. We look at data related to debt settlements, and a lot of other indicators which are useful to give a global picture. I think what was very interesting is that we conducted 120 interviews with over-indebted households in a number of member states, and then we had a very sizable number of interviews with the stakeholders and the experts in all member states, and probably several of you have been asked in the context of this study. And we had also a big seminar in January 2013, where we directly, at the beginning of the project, we got a lot of information. So what was the first difficulty we met with this study is that there is no common European definition of over-indebtedness. And in fact, when we asked the stakeholders whether it would be useful to have such a definition, then we come immediately with a difficulty, because there are national definitions, there are legal definitions, and everybody has its own definition, and it's very difficult to come with, let's say, something common. So for the study, since there was no such EU definition, we come with what we call an operational definition, which is written there and which reflects what we have just said. That is to say, households are over-indebted if they are having on an ongoing basis difficulty meeting their commitment, whether they relate to borrowing, a mortgage or not. This is a sense of secure and unsecured, a mortgage or consumer credit, but also to pay their rent, utility, and other household bills. So it's not limited to the issue of debt stemming from financial credit. It's also different from the issue of high indebtedness, because there is also a lot of discussion, confusion about people who are very indebted, but in fact they are wealthy because they took a very high mortgage, etc., but they are not over-indebted. And when we talk with sometimes credit institutions, there is here a kind of confusion between the two issues. So about the level of over-indebtedness, nobody will be surprised about the figure. We found, I mean, the EU survey found that almost 1 in 9 of the households has been in arrears with payment over the previous 12 months. And since we got this figure, probably the figure has gone up. But there is, of course, a very wide variation in the levels and the nature of the difficulty met by the households in individual member states, and I will come to that a bit later. The proportion of people in arrears on utility bills is close to 9%, and these arrears on utility bills is the highest among the overall arrears on key commitment. So it means either that the households choose to pay first, to reimburse first the financial commitments, because they know that the consequences for them will be, let's say, stronger, because probably also the credit institutions are better at getting back the money from household, whereas in many countries in Europe, if you don't pay immediately your utility bills, you have some grace period. Or it means another category that could explain this figure is that people who do not have credit already start to have arrears on utility bills. So you have these two phenomena to explain these figures. And here we have you have to make a distinction between the different member states and the so-called new member states who are no longer new, but the member states who have joined the EU most recently, to put it politically correct, and the southern member states then have levels of this proportion of arrears in utility bills more than double the EU average. So we see clearly a pattern. I think this confirmed what everybody has in mind, but it's interesting then to look at the national report, as I say at the beginning. And of course, this level of arrears measuring the over-indebtedness then, without any surprise, is increasing. I mean, this is the trend. So, indeed, the question, and it was mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, whether poverty leads to over-indebtedness or the contrary. But I think, I mean, the main trigger for over-indebtedness is the loss in income. And the lower the income, the greater the risks. And this is, I think, a conclusion that we can all share today. And we see this figure that households with disposable income of less than 60% of the national median are the most common type of over-indebted households. And then you can break that down into the various categories, and reading the national studies which have been done in France, I think in Belgium there is one which has just been published also by the Banque de France, sorry from the French tropism, but I'm French, as you could have guessed. And they all these national study point to the same categories: the younger people, people with many children, lone parents, migrants, non-EU citizens. You have a strange situation about tenants, so people who own their house or rent their house. Normally, when you rent your house, you have less risk of being over-indebted, but you have cases like Ireland and Spain where the situation is a contrary. So the causes of over-indebtedness here, again, also we have trying to adopt a very modest approach. It's just a tentative mapping. The study does not group them as we did on this slide, like exogenous and endogenous causes, but this is what the content of the study tells us. So for simplification, we have built these two categories. So all the exogenous causes, that are the causes which are not directly linked to a behavior of the household. So they are linked to the macroeconomic factors, the cost of living, the income drop, the employment, personal circumstances, sickness, divorces, etc. And the endogenous causes, they are what is linked to the wrong economic choices or the wrong economic behavior by the household, and we talk about the overconsumption, the type of credit, the poor financial management. And when we look at these two categories, from the study we deduct that the exogenous cause, so the first category, seems more prominent than the endogenous one, because 9 out of 10 of the respondents think that the macroeconomic factors are among the most important causes of the financial difficulties. But it doesn't mean, of course, that the endogenous causes, that is to say, the credit, maybe some non-responsible credit behavior, etc., are not important, because we have 7 out of 10 people who, of the respondents in the study who think that they are important. But really, we have the exogenous causes play a particular role. And this is what we also summarize below. The higher employment is associated with high arrears, while if you increase your disposable income, it's correlated, to simplify, with lower frequency of arrears. then when we talk about the capacity of household to manage their finance, and then we asked the professionals who are dealing with over-indebted household, and clearly the incapacity to deal with financial products. So the lack of capacity to understand the financial product, which I think everybody of us, we can recognize ourselves in this problem, and the lack of money management skills are chosen among the most important causes of over-indebtedness by 2/3 of the stakeholders. I think an interesting also conclusion of the study is that the use of consumer credit, so I'm not speaking about mortgage, but the consumer credit, in the sense of the consumer directive is credit which is used, I mean, for consumption goods, is positively associated with the likelihood of arrears, in particular arrears on utility bills. What does it mean? That consumer credit, this type of credit, is used also for the daily life. So not only for the specific purchases, but to cover utility bills. You take a consumer credit in order to reimburse your electricity bill, or your gas bill, or any, let's say, financial commitments that you have to deal with at the end of the month. And in contrast, the frequency of arrears is much less linked to the level of the debt. So people who are who have a high level of debt is probably because they are able to reimburse this debt because you are rich. You take a large mortgage, and there is no direct relationship between the level of the mortgage credit and the level of the arrears. So really, the role of the consumer credit to be able to reimburse the daily life expenses, I think it's something which is very very important.
Is it the absolute number or the loan-to-income ratio?
It's the absolute number. But here we have not done, I must be very, very clear, we have not done an econometrical model. Okay. We are just looking at the number, putting the number together, and looking that, in fact, there is a match. But we didn't develop an econometric model because you have seen the number of people who have, it's a kind of more empirical evidence. I have to be very clear on that. Then Mrs. Spanou mentioned the cultural attitude also, and I think this has changed a lot in the past, and it was not well seen in many member states, basically, to have debts. And this pattern has changed quite a lot. Because probably of overconsumption, etc. Now, due to the financial crisis, this trend is again changing, and people are much more careful vis-à-vis credit. But what is important is that many households who are who are over-indebted, in fact, they want to get out of the situation. They didn't get in the situation on purpose, and this is something sometimes you might hear by some professionals, etc. They didn't get there on purpose, and they want to get out of this situation. So the idea of abuse by households, I think, should be brought to the right proportion and not to be used probably as an excuse. The consequence, I see that I'm taking too much time. I'm going very quickly. So consequences are listed there. I think I will not go into the details about reduced standard of living, exclusion, etc. But the impact, as was said by Mr. Lamberts and Mrs. Spanou, is much broader than the households which are concerned only. They impact the whole society in terms of overall consumption, etc. The prevention, and here I will not go into the detail because this will be covered by further panels. The early identification of households at risk, the issue of responsible lending provision, and we are talking about, for instance, the implementation of the Consumer Credit Directive, financial education, which is one one contributor, let's say, to the issue, but which is not a silver bullet. We all know that, especially for people above a certain age. The measure to alleviate the impact, we mentioned debt advice. It was considered as the most effective measure by the stakeholders asked in the survey, and I think this is probably something we need to discuss. And this, I'm very much looking forward to the discussion of the panel on this issue. And Mr. Chair, I will stop here. Sorry for having gone a bit beyond my time. Thank you very much.
Never mind. Thank you anyway for this presentation. A lot of useful information.
And then we have the last speaker in this session, this morning session, Mr. Falanga. The word is yours.
So, good morning. The main aim of my speech will be to show you the major findings of a study made on behalf of the European Financial Inclusion Network about over-indebtedness. Okay. So, the first part of the study was dedicated to the very and then some data were collected from very important European-wide surveys to try to get some insights about over-indebtedness in the European Union. And then the EFIN stakeholders were involved to check the consistency of data that were being treated with their knowledge and perception of each national market. Defining over-indebtedness is a quite complex task, as you all know. Data related to over-indebtedness come from very heterogeneous sources. Lots of indices can be used and analyzed with this aim, but I won't go into details about this. We'll have an entire panel in this conference dedicated to EU indicators. For the purpose of this study, as much indicators as possible have been used, since each indicator has its own strengths and its own limits, so they should be used in a relative way, and they are likely to detect over-indebtedness at different stages with different severities, or just the risk of becoming over-indebted, which are somehow different. The surveys used to get some data were in particular the survey on income and living conditions by Eurostat, the household finance and consumption survey of the ECB, and the Eurobarometer, which is very important for the subjective indicators. A comparison has been made between data referred to the whole European Union, if available, or to the whole euro area, and data related to single countries or single demographic groups to try to highlight the major differences, because the final aim, the most important aim of this work was making it possible to wonder which factors cause these differences, and in particular which factors cause a higher frequency or severity of over-indebtedness. According to data, over-indebtedness doesn't regard very wide masses within the European Union, but it still regards a significant part of the European Union population, so it's not trivial to talk about it. There's a quite clear relationship between age of household reference person and all the over-indebtedness indicators. The worst classes are those in the middle, because retired or very old people usually have very low debts, and this applies also to very young people. And instead, it's very difficult to state what is the relationship between the various over-indebtedness measures and some relevant variables like wealth and income of the family considered, and also working status and education level of household's reference person. Of course, there may be a problem when income is linked with over-indebtedness measures by trade-off, because it means that the households with the lowest incomes are the ones with the highest debt compared with their income, which is contradictory. It shouldn't happen if the economic theory was respected. Talking about countries, three groups can be found. In particular, high and low levels of over-indebtedness indices tend to be associated with the same countries. Of course, there is also a third group of countries for which it's very difficult to get to definitive conclusions. This table gives us an example of two over-indebtedness indicators: the percentage of population with arrears, which is not a synonymous of over-indebtedness, of course, and the percentage of population with a very high debt service on income, which is the most widely used indicator of over-indebtedness. As you can see, a country like Cyprus has very high levels of both these indicators, while a country like Austria has very low levels of these indicators. In particular, the countries in the left side of this graph seem to have the same distribution for these two indicators. The major difference can be seen for Greece, but above this we should consider that the orange line is referred to 2012, while the blue line is referred to 2010, and you all know that that couple of years for Greece were dramatic, and also maybe also for Italy the difference can be explained by this. Stakeholders' feedbacks confirmed the consistency of data with their knowledge of each national market, but even if these comments are very unstructured, it's still possible to underline some remarkable common points. In particular, almost all the stakeholders mentioned the weak macroeconomic scenario as an important driver of over-indebtedness. Almost all the stakeholders don't trust the credit providers who use in particular the value of assets and collaterals as an important part of their creditworthiness assessments. In particular, it seems that in countries in which creditworthiness assessments are income-led, there are less problems with debt. And some stakeholders belonging in particular to countries of the Eastern Europe and countries which joined the European Union in 2004 or after highlighted the fact that there are in their countries some non-banking credit providers which are non-regulated, and these credit providers are considered in a very bad way, because EFIN stakeholders think that these entities provide credit after poor creditworthiness assessments, and also products which can be considered toxic. So the suggestion is that these entities should be somehow regulated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We started 15 minutes late. We are now already 5 minutes late to the next panel. Nevertheless, I would like to take 1 or 2 or 3 questions. Anyone, any questions to the member of this panel except Mr. Lamberts, because he had to leave at 10. No questions? Okay, well, it's been very clear, obviously, then. So thank you very much. And then we will win some time and we will make... Oh, 1 question there. Please go ahead. State your name and your question. Push that button.
Okay, yeah, my name is Patricia Pulido. I'm from ACAF, Italy. And my question is, we look at the over-indebtedness always from the credit point of view, consumer point of view, or even asset. But we're still missing some element into the equation, I think, is savings. What about the savings capacity? Because, first of all, we look at the last presentation, say, okay, formal products or formal banking is good, informal is bad, because we are always thinking about, the money lenders or maybe the not regulated institution that they provide credit at a very high interest rate. But informal is also family, some friends that they can help you sometimes. It's about not only incomes but also social relationship, that they can help you in when you are in a not very good situation, in an over-indebted situation. And then, of course, some of the problem is because, well, the credit, the institution, microfinance institution and banking institution give some credit looking at the asset as a collateral, and also about looking at the point of view of maybe your capacity, but not about your savings capacity. If we look more at the saving, what is your savings capacity? So what is your repayment capacity? And also what is your level of consumption at the household? Because there are some households that they've got a lot of incomes, very high incomes, but then you've got a lot of expenditures. So we have to put more, I think, elements into the equation. What do you think about savings? Do you think savings could help us to know better what is the capacity of the household and how we can prevent better over-indebtedness? Thank you.
More questions? No? Then we'll leave it at that one. Maybe you can say something about it?
But I don't think we have an answer to that.
Well, no, in the study, as we said, we covered, let's say, the capacity to meet the financial commitments. So my first reaction, but we didn't go into the details of the saving to my knowledge. The capacity to meet the financial commitment also means that you will use your savings to repay these financial commitments. And we know that there are other studies which showed, not our study, but showed that, of course, the capacity to put some money aside by household is also a way not to fall into over-indebtedness, because when you have typically an unforeseen expenses, then you have a capacity to reimburse part of these unforeseen expenses with your savings. But our definition was much broader. It's a capacity to reimburse, and it is based on your flow of revenues and your savings without any distinction between the two.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Henks and Mr. Bader.
Merci, Président. Je suis membre ici du Comité économique et social européen et j'ai une question. En ce qui concerne la pauvreté, on distingue entre un risque de pauvreté et la pauvreté effective. Cette notion de risque de surendettement, elle n'existe pas dans le domaine du surendettement. Et je m'explique. Moi, je travaille dans le logement et on a constaté qu'il y a pas mal de propriétaires qui ont contracté des emprunts qui les poussent vers un surendettement. Alors, dans les études EESC, ils ne sont pas repris parce que le remboursement d'un prêt hypothécaire n'est pas considéré comme une charge, mais c'est un investissement. Alors, ces charges ne sont pas reprises dans les statistiques EESC, ils ne sont pas considérés. Or, il y a quand même un grand risque, et on a vu aux États-Unis, où ça peut mener lorsque des ménages achètent un immeuble, un logement, et par là, ils ont un grand risque de surendettement. Est-ce que ça, c'est un phénomène qui est analysé ici dans les autres pays ou non?
Je voudrais poser une question à Monsieur Micol au sujet de l'étude qu'il a présentée, qui est très intéressante, ne serait-ce que parce qu'à travers cette étude, on recoupe les constats qui ont été faits dans beaucoup d'endroits. Mais il y a une chose qui est très inquiétante dans cette étude et que l'on constate également, moi aussi je vais parler de la France, je suis désolée, mais c'est l'exemple que je connais le mieux, on constate une augmentation des impayés extrêmement importante, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a des gens qui sont surendettés au sens où cela s'entend normalement, à savoir qu'avec qu'avec leurs revenus, ils ne peuvent pas faire face à leurs obligations. Donc on constate que ces gens sont surendettés, mais il y a aussi tous les gens très endettés. Et ces gens, donc, il y a une augmentation des impayés, on le voit dans les fichiers qui sont spécialisés, et il y a aussi, disons, de plus en plus de personnes qui piochent dans leur épargne, notamment dans les assurances vie et autres. Et ça, c'est très important, et ça doit se résoudre par des mesures de prévention dans la mesure où on peut les prendre, et je voudrais savoir si l'on a des idées sur la question. Merci, monsieur.
Monsieur Micol.
Oui, je vais répondre dans ma langue maternelle, pour une fois. Oui, je pense qu'on ne peut pas faire dire à l'étude plus que ce que l'étude dit et donc c'est pour ça que je disais qu'elle doit être complétée par toute la discussion et plus de 30 ans, je pense à une vision beaucoup plus générale que celle que peut donner cette étude. Donc, pour répondre d'abord à la question du monsieur Hanks, notre étude ne couvre pas cette dimension. Ce qui est important, ce que vous mentionnez en fait, c'est probablement le manque ou le défaut du créditeur quant à l'analyse de la capacité de remboursement du consommateur quand il prend un crédit hypothécaire. Donc ça, avec la nouvelle directive crédit hypothécaire qui doit être transposée, je pense, d'ici mars 2016, et qui contient des dispositions qui sont similaires à la directive crédit à la consommation existante, c'est quelque chose qui la mise en œuvre de cette directive devrait contribuer à traiter ce problème. La question essentielle qui reste, c'est comment cette analyse de la capacité de remboursement doit être menée. Et c'est ça probablement une question à laquelle nous devons réfléchir, à la fois pour la directive crédit à la consommation et à la directive crédit hypothécaire, c'est-à-dire toute la question de cette évaluation de capacité de remboursement. Est-ce qu'elle doit se baser sur des données passées, sur du scoring, sur des bases de données, comme c'est le cas dans plusieurs États membres, ou est-ce qu'elle doit se baser plutôt sur les flux futurs de revenus et les flux futurs de remboursement du crédit? Et donc, poser la question et plus ou moins y répondre d'une certaine façon. Et donc, ce qui va être très important pour la mise en œuvre de la directive crédit hypothécaire, et je pense aussi pour notre directive, celle dont nous sommes responsables à la DG Justice et Consommateurs sur les crédits, c'est cette analyse de capacité de remboursement futur. Théoriquement, le créditeur ne devrait pas accorder un crédit qui conduit un ménage à rentrer dans le surendettement. Voilà. Donc, les mesures c'est la première mesure de prévention, si vous voulez. C'est ne pas accorder ce crédit ou accorder dans des modalités qui permettent au ménage de le rembourser. Donc, je ne sais pas si, je pense que je n'ai pas répondu réellement à la question de Mme Madère ou de M. Hanks, mais à ce stade, je pense que nous ne pouvons pas aller au-delà de ce que dit l'étude et de ce que nous disent les textes législatifs. Simplement, nous devons réfléchir à comment les mettre en œuvre de manière plus appropriée sur le terrain.
Okay, thank you. Well, that concludes this session.